Before I start this, I just want to make it clear. I'm not here to complain about young people. God knows my generation had our obsessions too. Bell-bottoms, tie-dye, the war in Vietnam. It's just strange, that's all. It's even weirder than when the whole neighborhood got big hair and started jogging with their stereos back in the 80s. It started on the corner of Strawberry Court, just over yonder. I was having my 5 o'clock coffee on the back porch when I saw this kid in a gray sweatshirt just standing there. I figured he was just waiting for a ride or meeting with some friends. And even if he wasn't, it was none of my business. Or at least, it wasn't till he started following Sammy, the girl with the golden retriever. It's been a lonely life ever since my wife Pam died, and seeing Sammy walk by is usually the best part of my day. That afternoon, though, was different. I was afraid for her. That kid behind Sammy couldn't have been older than 13 or so, but there was something hungry and wrong about the way he watched her, the way he followed her. Sammy always walks with one of those white doodads in her ear. She keeps her music turned up loud. There was no way she could have heard the kid's footsteps behind her. I rushed to my kitchen window. Between my back porch, the kitchen, and the front stoop, I've got a pretty good view of the neighborhood. But I'd never seen anything like the scene that was waiting for me in the window above my sink. The way the 5 kids had spaced themselves out reminded me of a pack of hunting wolves. But they didn't move. Not at first. Then 2 of them fell in behind Sammy, and 1 kept pace with her from the other side of the street. The kid in front of Sammy was kicking along nonchalantly on his skateboard, but I knew he was a part of it too. I didn't know what they were planning for, but I doubted it was anything good. My knees aren't what they used to be, and it took me forever to get my shoes on and get out the front door. When I did, Sammy was nowhere in sight. The kids had probably spooked her and she'd gone home early, or so I hoped. I gripped my cane tight and walked down the street to knock on her door. How I wished I was 50 years younger. If I were, I wouldn't have been looking over my shoulder for signs of those damn kids. I wouldn't be so skittish about every little noise behind the hedges and fences along the way. And I wouldn't have to worry about a hip-shattering fall or running out of breath. Instead, I'd buy Sammy a bouquet of roses, get down on one knee, and... "Mr. Hall!" Sammy opened her door just a crack. She looked nervous. "How's it going?" "Them kids," I panted. "They were..." "What kids?" the most beautiful woman on the block asked me. There was worry in her soft blue eyes. "Mr. Hall? Are you feeling all right?" "Please, call me Rich," I sighed. "And before you ask, I did indeed take my meds this morning." "I'm sorry, I didn't mean..." Sammy began. I waved a hand. "Don't worry, I seen something strange. There was a group of teenagers behind you, and I wanted to make sure you were all right." "Oh." Sammy fidgeted, blocking my view of the inside of the house with her body. Maybe it was just a mess, but it felt like it was more than that. Something was wrong. "That's very kind of you, but I'm fine. Everything's fine. I really need to go back to work now, though, so... Well, just remember, I'm right up the block. You call if you need anything." "Okay, bye." She practically slammed the door in my face. My walk back home was troubled. Maybe I'd stuck my nose in where it didn't belong. Maybe I was going senile, or even worse, getting obsessed with Sammy, a woman less than half my age. The hair stood up on my arms, the back of my neck. Strange, how a person just knows when they're being watched. I gripped my cane tight. My eyes scanned the yards nearby. They were standing so still I didn't notice them at first. 2 of the kids who'd been following Sammy. The sunset was at their backs. The distorting light made it impossible to see their faces, and it made their shadows look stretched and wrong. "Hey," I shouted. They didn't budge. "Hey," I shouted again. Nothing. I wasn't going to cross 2 yards to try to chase them down, and they knew it. I shook my head and kept walking. but I couldn't help but look over my shoulder as I went. I never went to Nam myself, but some of my friends who came back would tell me about this hair-raising feeling they'd get when they knew they were being watched, stalked, hunted. 50 years later, in my own quiet suburban neighborhood, I thought I knew what they meant. I locked the door and scanned the street, but the kids were gone. In fact, it looked just like an ordinary evening. Couples pushed strollers down the sidewalk. Toddlers swerved on their tricycles. It was like I'd just imagined the whole thing. I spent what was left of the afternoon checking my pill bottles for side effects like hallucinations or paranoia. By the time the sun finally set, I knew I wasn't seeing things, but it was impossible to fall asleep. The branches of the big cherry tree outside looked too much like dark figures standing just outside my bedroom window. I retreated to my living room armchair with a cold beer and an old war movie, hoping the booze and simple black and white action would lull me to sleep. I woke with a start. It was just after 3 a.m. My mouth was dry and I had to piss, but that wasn't what had awoken me. Someone was ringing my doorbell. Ding dong, ding dong, ding dong, ding dong, ding dong, ding dong. I grabbed the old .38 revolver from my bedside drawer. Its cool steel helped me steady my shaking hands, but I didn't want to use it, especially not on some damn kids. I put it away and called the cops. When they arrived, there was no noise but the cicadas. I stood in my bathrobe on the front stoop, explaining what had happened. The cops promised they'd look into it, but they looked even more tired than I was. The younger of the two lingered on the porch, like he wanted to say something more. But his silver-haired colleague called him back to the cruiser with a hard glare. "It's a pretty common prank, after all," the younger kid sighed. "Kids are going back to school, meeting up with their friends, running wild. Doesn't have to mean anything serious. Not necessarily. Well, have a good night, sir." He walked off, fingers drumming nervously on his belt. It doesn't have to mean anything serious? Not necessarily? What the hell was that about? The next afternoon, I didn't see Sammy walking her dog. I took a walk past her house, but her car was gone and the lights were out. Rex Martin, Sammy's neighbor, saw me peering in the darkened windows and waved. "If you're looking for Sam, I think she's on vacation." "And she didn't say nothing about it beforehand?" "If she did, I wouldn't remember. Been so busy running the girls back and forth to daycare that I can't tell my left hand from my right. Have a good one." He waved again and disappeared into the family minivan. If anyone could use a vacation, it was Rex. As I meandered through the neighborhood, lost in thought, a red rubber ball bounced over a nearby fence and rolled to a stop in front of me. It was just a little thing, but it chilled my blood. No toddler came running up to ask for it back, and when I peeked over the fence, the yard was empty. Someone had thrown it on purpose. Someone had thrown it to remind me that I was being watched. That night, I dreamed of Santa Claus. I could hear his heavy footsteps above me, smell the soot as he came down the chimney with a bag full of toys I'd never had growing up in West Virginia coal town. It was odd. I could see his fur-lined red outfit and bright white beard, but where his face should have been, there was only darkness. He gave me a red rubber ball, or at least that's what I thought it was at first. I turned the round thing over. It was sticky, felt like wet hair, and smelled like spoiled meat. It wasn't a red rubber ball at all. It was Sammy's severed head. I sat up in bed with a gasp. Just a dream. So why did I still hear someone walking on my roof? They were stomping just above my head. By the time I got my old bones moving and made it outside with my flashlight and my pistol, they were gone. Only the stars looked down from above my roof, twinkling, like they were laughing at me. "Rich?" someone whispered. I spun around, the .38 shaking in my hand. It was Austin Wang. my neighbor. He was barefoot and in his matching blue pajamas, his hands up in the air. My God, I nearly shot him. I hadn't cried since I'd broken my arm when I was 9 years old, but the mix of anger and helplessness I felt made me want to start bawling right then and there. There was someone. I gestured helplessly at the roof with the pistol, and Austin flinched. I don't see anyone up there, Mr. Hall. I knew that tone in Austin's voice. It was the tone used by cops when trying to talk someone down from jumping off a rooftop. The tone Shrinks used with patients having a schizophrenic break. Why don't you put the pistol down and try to get some sleep, Rich? If you want, I can drive you into town tomorrow. You can talk to someone. With a wave of my hand, I went back inside and sat on my bed. They all thought I was crazy. Or at least, I thought so until I checked my mailbox the next morning, where I found an anonymous note on a folded Post-it. If you let them know that you know, it only gets worse. The next evening, I set out for a walk around the neighborhood with a new spring in my step. I wore my standard old man uniform, a sun visor, faded polo shirt, khaki shorts, high white socks, and walking shoes. I waved to neighbors, whistled as I walked, and brought a crossword puzzle to fill in when I stopped to rest at the bench by the pool. Nothing to see here. With a black pen, I began to fill in squares on the crossword. One square for each dark, silent house I saw. I didn't count rentals, for sale homes, or anyone who I knew was on a real vacation. I only counted the homes where there should have been life, but wasn't. Homes with uncut grass, lightless windows, mail and newspapers piled up like firewood. I counted 13 of them. What the hell was going on? Before all this started, I never paid much attention to young people. I didn't give a damn if they played their music too loud or walked across my lawn. They'd do their thing, I figured, and I'd do mine. But ever since a group of kids started stalking people, me included, I've begun to notice something very wrong with the youth in my town. At first, I couldn't put my finger on what it was, but as I drove past a group of them standing in a circle on a street corner, I realized what was so off about them. It was the quiet. There was no music blaring from a portable speaker, no laughter or yelling or goofing off, just endless, silent staring. What the hell were they waiting for? I drove into town to do my shopping with a stupid grin on my face and cheerful music on the radio, just in case they were watching me. It stuck in my craw, having to pretend that everything was fine after everything I'd seen. But I knew the alternative. They'd already tried my doors and walked on my roof. The next step? Probably popping the latch on a window or slipping under the garage door. For all I knew, they'd come slithering up the damn sewer pipes. It was getting harder and harder to keep up that fake smile. 4 kids were lined up in front of the woods across from the grocery store. In unison, they swiveled their hooded heads to watch each car roll by. If I looked in the rearview mirror, would I see that their necks twisted all the way around? I wasn't sure I wanted to know. Once I'd parked and gone inside the grocery store, I risked a glance out at the 4 preteens across the street. The chilly fall wind blew dead leaves across their sneakers, but they were as still as statues. I shuddered. Everyone in the beeping checkout lines was going about their business, as though none of this was happening. Well, almost everyone. I saw the young cop who'd come by my house pushing a cart full of dry beans and rice like he was preparing for the apocalypse. Maybe he was. The young cop pretended not to notice me when I waved, but I wasn't taking no for an answer. He took off, and I went after him, pushing myself alone with my cane like a busted old locomotive. I guess he realized that an old guy chasing him through the supermarket was a lot more suspicious than stopping and having a quiet chat. He parked his overflowing cart by the restroom and nodded toward it. Inside, the young cop pushed open the stall doors. Checking to see if we were alone? What the hell do you think you're doing? He hissed. Jim Kelly read his name tag. I could ask you the same thing. I crossed my arms and stood between the cop and the door. A shopping cart full of dry goods? 14 standing by the road for hours on a Tuesday morning. And the cops do nothing? People are walking around scared of their own damn shadows. They should be, Officer Kelly whispered. He looked over his shoulder at the bathroom door. You should be too. We don't even know what's going on any more than you civilians. Orders from the top are to only investigate the cases that can't be covered up, and to deny the rest. Cases? My jaw dropped open. My God, Jim, how many are there? Officer Jim Kelly shrugged. I don't have access to that information. Look, I'm sure the higher-ups are handling whatever this is in the best way they can. Best thing you can do for yourself and for the people you care about is just keep your head down. Don't get involved. Can you do that for me, Mr. Hall? The bathroom door swung open. A deli shop employee running for the urinal. The young cop and I pretended to wash our hands and went our separate ways. When I pulled out of the parking lot, the 4 kids across the street were gone. Or so I thought. As I turned the corner, I saw 7 of them walking out of the trees. Their sneakers were filthy, and the bottom of their jeans were caked with mud. They were walking with jerky steps towards an abandoned station wagon. The driver's side door was hanging open, and the emergency flashers were blinking, like someone had just been dragged out of it. That settled it. Officer Jim Kelly and his superiors were full of shit. Like hell I was going to sit back and wait for them to come for me. Sammy and the families who lived in those empty houses, they hadn't noticed anything was wrong. They had gone about their business as usual. And what had it got them? All of them were gone, and I didn't want to imagine how. Who else could I turn to? Who else might know what was happening in my town? I just drove for a while. I didn't have any particular place to go. I just needed to think. To stay away from my house. And to try to figure out how bad this was. In every neighborhood I passed, though, I saw at least one group of them. A pack of young people standing silently. Waiting. For what? I didn't know. The high school parking lot was half empty, and no one played basketball on the courts after school. When I got closer to my own suburb, however, I reckoned I found an answer to my question. A pale teenager on an electric scooter, with hair that looked like a damn mop and music blaring from the phone hanging off his neck. I wouldn't have noticed him at all if it wasn't for what was waiting for him up ahead. He couldn't see it from where he was, but up ahead the sidewalk narrowed and passed through the fence of a city park. That was where they were waiting. 5 of those silent, statue-still kids. Hey, I shouted to the kid. Either he couldn't hear me, or he was ignoring the weird old guy yelling something at him out of a passing car. He kept going, until he noticed them. In the glow of the streetlight, I saw it all. The way the silent kids blocked his path. The way 2 more of them crept out of the woods, like they'd been planning this. The look of panic on the pale teenager's face when he realized there was no escape. I just couldn't watch this happen. Hey, I yelled again. I pulled over near the park fence and pulled my .38 revolver from the glove box. I limped toward the pack of kids. They were a wide range of ages, anything from 10 to 17. Some of them had sneakers worth more than my monthly Social Security check, while others wore oversized Walmart clothes. And whatever was happening with these kids didn't discriminate by race or gender. The only thing they had in common was the numb, slack-jawed look on their faces. It was like their bodies were there, but their minds were off somewhere else, screaming. When I got close, they all turned on me. I won't lie. When I saw them all move in unison like that, even their footsteps, I had second thoughts. I wondered if it might not be better to get back in my car, put on another black and white war movie, sip a cold beer, and forget I'd ever seen the pale teenager with the mop haircut. It's hard to explain it, but there's some kind of human connection that comes when you lock eyes with somebody. I wanted to back away, but that teenager on the scooter was looking right at me, and his eyes said, "Help." "What are you kids doing?" I tried to sound intimidating, but the words came out as a scared little squeak. If they rushed me, I was done for it, and they knew it. A teenager with a square jaw, a muscular build, and a single diamond earring stepped forward from the group. I could have sworn I'd seen him before, but I couldn't remember where. And besides, that slackened expression made all their faces seem similar. Suddenly, the group surrounded the teen on the scooter, grabbing him. Bang. I'd never fired my .38 outside of a gun range before. The noise was ear-splitting. It echoed off the trees and nearby houses like a thunderclap. It was a warning shot, straight up into the sky. I tried to keep my hands from shaking as I pointed at the kid with the diamond earring. "Your move, Chief." Without a word, the pack slunk away. The kid with the diamond earring walked backwards into the twilight behind them. Even when I couldn't see his weird, mannequin-like face any longer, I knew he was still staring at me from out there in the dark. The kid on the scooter with the mop haircut muttered. "Thanks." When he turned to go, I grabbed his collar. "Not so fast. When you saw those kids, you recognized them. You know who they are. You might even have some idea what they're up to. And before you go zooming off, you're going to tell me about it." "What's your name?" I asked the teenager in my passenger seat. It took him a minute to respond. But then again, he'd just been almost jumped by a crowd of silent kids and been rescued by an old man with a revolver. His shock made perfect sense to me. My heart was pounding and my damned arthritic hands ached from gripping the gun. "Caden," he finally sighed. "Caden Cooper. I appreciate your help back there, Mr. Hall. But please, call me Rich." I shook his hand. We had driven away from the park and the weird kids lurking in its shadows. In the headlights of oncoming cars, I got a better view of Caden Cooper. What I saw led me to believe that this hadn't been his first run-in with the silent kids, as I'd started calling them. He had a faded bruise on the side of his face, the kind you get from being punched in the mouth. Other than that, though, he was a handsome kid. Pam and I were never able to have kids or grandkids, but if we had, I reckoned they might look a little like Caden. Stupid haircut and all. "I'm going to drop you off at home, Caden," I told the kid. "But I did you a pretty solid favor back there, and I think it's fair to ask for one in return. I just want to know what's going on around here. You won't be able to stop it. The teachers couldn't. The police can't either." Caden kept peering out the windows, looking, no doubt, for more groups like the one that had tried to jump him. "That kid with the earring, I thought I recognized him. Who is he?" "Brett Halloran, the mayor's son. All this started with him. Look." I pulled to a stop in an empty church parking lot. Caden took out his phone. He showed me a grainy video of a high school football field at night. The wobbly camera zoomed in on a group of kids, led by Brett, surrounding a football player. The football player looked like he was made of solid muscle, but the grass stains on his knees and sweat on his forehead told me he was exhausted from practice. And there were a lot of the silent kids. When they grabbed him, he closed his eyes like he knew what was coming. Brett held a screen up to his face, and the others, they peeled his eyelids open. A glowing red light lit up from the screen. I'm sure that football player would have screamed if the silent kids hadn't been holding his jaw shut. The longer he was forced to watch whatever was on that screen, the less he struggled. Although I could see what looked like tears streaming down his cheeks. When the red glow from Brett's phone blinked off, the football player rose jerkily and stood among the rest of them. There was a sudden scuffling sound. I hastily whispered, "Oh, shit," and every slack-jawed, mannequin-like teenager started sprinting at the person holding the camera. The rest of the recording was just shaky footage of a person running through trees. And then, nothing. My best friend Leandra uploaded that video. She hasn't been at school since. What do you think? Drive! Caden shouted. A kid in a white baseball cap stood at the edge of the parking lot. He had raised his phone in the air, and its screen lit up with a freakish red light. In the foggy field behind him, I saw the red glow of dozens more. We'd been found. I jammed the car into gear, swerving around kids as they mobbed us. One slammed a rock into the passenger side window, cracking the glass but not breaking it. I turned onto the empty street, and the dark shapes of the silent kids disappeared into the fog. We'd almost made it to the highway when I heard a strange sound from the rear right of the car. Caden? I asked. Do you know how to change a tire? There was nothing but fog and pine trees along the state route. Headlights zoomed by occasionally, but no one stopped. And I couldn't blame them. There weren't any of the silent kids around, unless they were hiding in the trees. I stood watch and whispered instructions to Caden while he did the real work. I guess we're even, Caden grunted when he finished tightening the last lug nut, and I had to agree. I would have never been able to put on the donut tire myself. He'd saved my ass, but we only had about 50 miles on the spare. Wherever we went, we had to make it count, and the silent kids knew where both of us lived. Isn't there anybody you can call? Caden asked. The sad truth was, there wasn't. My family and close friends had moved on or died a long time ago. All I really had left was neighbors. I called Austin Wang, my next-door neighbor, first. Someone picked up, but there was only dead air on the other side. Hello? Austin? More silence. And then, click. I felt a pang of worry when I saw Sammy's name in my contacts. It couldn't hurt to try. She picked up on the 7th ring. Hello? She whispered. Sam, I gasped. It's Rich. Where are you? Are you all right? They were already in the house, she murmured. When you came, I didn't want you to get hurt. I fought them off and got away, but... Where are you now? My car's on its last legs. My Uncle Hugh's hunting cabin. She gave me an address and some directions. Got it. Caden showed me the location he'd already pulled up on his phone. It's off a dirt forest road in the middle of nowhere, so be careful not to get lost. Sammy's warning echoed in my ears as I pulled back onto the state route and drove Caden and I towards safety. Or so I hoped. It's hell getting old. The donut tire gave out about halfway down the dirt driveway of the cabin where Sammy was hiding out, which meant we had to walk the rest of the way. It was only about a mile, but what a mile. Slippery gravel and eroded dirt. No place to sit down and rest. It hurts my pride to admit it, but by the end of it, Caden was practically carrying me. There were no lights except for our flashlights and the stars. I'd always hated walking through the woods at night, the way the light turns the branches into bare old bones. My own grandfather dragged me along to hunt down a rabid dog that was loose behind his farm when I wasn't much older than Caden, and I'll never forget the mad look in that slobbering animal's eyes when I pulled the trigger. It was half hate, half horror. The face of a living thing taken over by something outside of its control. I hadn't seen anything like it again. Until I saw the silent kids. I would have preferred to face 10 rabid dogs, rather than see a group of them come walking out of the woods. I could see the cabin up ahead, a black square in the darkness. It had seen better days. The roof was covered with dead branches and pine needles, and there was no light inside the dirty windows. Rich? I don't know about this, Caden whispered. Do you still have the gun? I did, but tired as I was, I doubted I could even aim straight. Something rustled in the bushes. It was barking? Monster, Sammy's golden retriever, came running out to greet us. 2 headlamps struggled through the trees behind him. Sammy, and A wiry, middle-aged guy in full camo. They were dragging a blue tarp between them. A deer. As soon as he saw us, the middle-aged guy dropped the tarp and racked his shotgun. "Fuck are they?" "That's Rich, Uncle Hugh," Sammy explained. "My neighbor, and Caden." The kid waved nervously. "You told him about this place? Jesus, Sammy. Not running a goddamn refugee camp up here." Sammy's Uncle Hugh had the round, wild eyes of someone who'd spent a long time far away from other people. It was a look I'd seen in some of my buddies who'd gone to Nam, and I didn't like it at all. "Rich tried to save me from them," Sammy explained patiently. "And Caden here looks pretty strong. We need someone like that if we're going to be staying up here for a long time." I noticed she was still wearing the suburban power walking outfit, with one of those fuzzy green army surplus jackets zipped up over top of it. She looked drained, not only from the nightmare happening in our town, but also from handling her Uncle Hugh. Hugh scratched his cheeks and sighed. They were gaunt and stubbly. I wondered what he'd been living on out here in the woods. "Well, you're here now," Hugh grunted. "Might as well make yourselves useful. We gotta get this meat smoked before it spoils." A few hours later, we were all packed into Hugh's tiny cabin. Its single room was lit by a bare generator-powered light bulb, and heat came from a potbelly stove, the same one that warmed the canned beans Hugh offered us for dinner. Generations of cans were stacked high on every wall. I think I even spotted some cobwebby Crystal Pepsi up by the ceiling. There was barely enough room for the four of us, 5 counting Monster, to sleep in front of the stove. I'd forgotten how chilly it could get in the woods at night, even at the end of summer. "I'm gonna go check the perimeter again," Hugh grunted. He'd been twitching nervously on his cot for the past hour, unable to sleep. "Maybe set some traps." "Traps?" Caden looked at me with alarm. Sammy covered up a smile and rolled her eyes. The door slammed, leaving the 3 of us alone in the cabin. "Hugh's a lot to handle, but he means well. He used to be a university professor. Ecology. When he saw the direction the world was going, he taught himself all this stuff and moved out to the cabin to wait for the apocalypse." She laughed bitterly. "I don't think he knows what to do with himself now that it might actually be here." "Those kids, they followed you home, didn't they?" I asked. Sam took a long, rattling breath. Whatever had happened had traumatized her, and I didn't want to make her go through it again. "Look, if you don't want to talk about it." "No." Sam shut her eyes and shook her head. "You need to know what we're up against. For me, it had been a normal afternoon. I'd gotten back home with Monster, and I was just turning the key in the front door lock when I saw their shadows on the porch. They were right behind me, and before I could say anything, they pushed me inside. They had this dead, emotionless look on their faces, like puppets on a string, you know?" I nodded. I knew. Sam went on. "By the time you came to the door, they'd locked Monster in the downstairs bathroom, and 3 of them had grabbed knives from the kitchen like they were going to make a salad or something. All at once, they held their fingers up to their lips. That's why I didn't say anything to you." Sam sniffed. "They put zip ties on my wrists and marched me into the woods. They never said anything, not a word. But I think that somehow they were communicating, or something was communicating with them. It was getting dark by then. They took out their phones to light the way, and the screens had this weird red glow." Caden and I exchanged a glance. It made my head hurt, like something was trying to worm its way inside. And finally, we came up to a trail, and I actually recognized it. It led to a place where we used to party back in high school, up on the hill beneath the power lines. You know where I mean, Caden? I don't get invited to a lot of parties. Caden shook his head. Well, anyway, it used to be a cliffy little hill overlooking the town and the river, but now it's different. Some of the cliffs have sort of collapsed. There's this cave. Sammy paused. This part seemed to be hard for her. Who knows how far down it goes? The kids brought me to the edge of it, and I felt hot, wet air blowing up from it, like it was breathing. It smelled like rotten meat, and when I looked around, I saw sneakers, shirts, dirty jeans in a pile. Everything was lit by that weird red light, and I realized what was going to happen. Whatever was down there, they were going to feed me to it. So how'd you get away? Caden asked. The kid's voice was pure suspicion. They threw me down on the rocks to strip me, I guess, before they threw me down into the pit. But when I hit the ground, the zip tie snapped and I ran. When Caden and I looked at each other, Sammy was cute and honest and kind. I liked her. But it was hard to believe that she'd just given the slip to a pack of silent kids in the woods at night. Sam, I began. Are you sure they didn't just let you get away? What? Sammy had our skeptical faces. But why? Why would they do that? So that you'd lead them to others who knew what's going on, Caden shouted. We don't really believe that, do you, Rich? Sammy asked. Caden was watching me too, waiting for a response. But I didn't have one. My joints felt like they were on fire after the short walk to the cabin, and I was too tired to think straight. I didn't have it in me to be the wise old man. Not tonight. We heard a single, lonely gunshot from somewhere in the woods. Monster got to his feet and started barking. And then, all hell broke loose. It's hard to count running footsteps in the dark. How many of them were there? 10? 100? I couldn't say. But just before Caden slammed the cabin storm shutters in their faces, I got a look at the silent kids. Whatever was controlling them, it was putting them through hell. Their skin was cut by thorns, and their clothes were splattered with mud. They must have come over 30 miles to Hugh's cabin on foot. I wondered if they felt the pain. I wondered if they were still conscious somewhere in there, screaming in the dark on the other side of those dead, doll-like faces. I didn't have to wonder, however, what had happened to Hugh. In the eerie red glow of the silent kids' phones, I could see that some of their fists and feet were bloody, like they'd just beaten someone to death. Caden slammed the shutters on the silent kids a few seconds before they shattered the glass. Oh shit, oh shit, oh shit. Sammy was hunched over on the floor, clutching her skull. Outside, the silent kids were pounding on the walls of the cabin. I couldn't tell if they were trying to tear the building apart with their bare hands, or just drive us insane from the noise. The walls and roof were sturdy. Hugh had made sure of that. It was the storm shutters that I was worried about. They seemed to come a little looser with every bash from outside. While Caden tried to match guns to ammo, I considered the possibilities. I'd never seen any of the silent kids drive, or do anything else more complicated than stalking people on foot. So how far would they go to get us out of here? All they'd have to do was light a fire. Behind me, Caden released the safety of an AR-15. I swatted the barrel down towards the floor. Don't shoot any of them, I pleaded. Not unless there's no other way. Here, Sammy whispered. I thought she'd just been having a mental breakdown on the floor, but she'd been looking for something. A cellar door. Of course. If anyone would have a trap door in his cabin, it was Hugh. My uncle showed me this tunnel when I was a little girl. I used to play down there, until I grew up and got grossed out by bugs and dirt. Caden was already scrambling forward, rifle and flashlight in hand. Monster barked and followed after. Another nasty blow splintered the storm shutters. And as I stood to follow Caden, my leg gave out. A pulled muscle? Sprained ankle? I had no idea, but it looked like I was going nowhere. The light bulb swung wildly from the battering hands and feet hitting the cabin walls. Get a move on, I told Sam. Looks like this is as far as I go. I lay back and clutched my thigh. No way. I couldn't believe it. Sammy had grabbed me by the shoulders. She dragged me over to the tunnel. You're getting out of here, even if I have to drag you myself, if I have to push you from behind. Now get crawling. No one had spoken to me like that since my wife Pam died, but it got me moving. The tunnel was damp and filthy. It was barely wide enough for a person Sammy or Caden's size, and I wasn't as skinny as I used to be. Every foot was agony, but we were getting somewhere. I only hoped that wherever we got, it would be far enough away. Oh shit, Caden gasped up ahead. It wasn't exactly a phrase you wanted to hear when crammed in a dark, muddy tunnel. There was a funny smell in the air, like cow pies mixed with gasoline. Anfo. He crawled into a small dirt room. In the glow of his flashlight, I could see plastic sacks filled with crumbly white stuff, like styrofoam. A gas mask, hazmat suit, and other survival gear hung from the wall. What is all this stuff? Sammy asked as she helped me squeeze out of the tunnel. It's an explosive, Caden explained. One of the easiest ones to make it home. It doesn't detonate on its own, but there's probably a blasting charge around here somewhere. Maybe Tovex or Pentolite. We stared. What? Caden rolled his eyes. I wrote my history term paper on the Oklahoma City bomber. This is the stuff he used. You really was preparing for the end of the world, Sammy said in awe. Are you thinking what I'm thinking? The cave? Caden asked. Sammy nodded. Are you two out of your minds? I hissed. We gotta get as far away from this town as possible. Let the authorities handle it. Oh, right, like how they've been handling it so far? Caden snapped back. I groaned and shut my eyes. We weren't explosive experts. We weren't soldiers or government agents. We didn't stand a chance against whatever was out there. We don't have much time before the Silent Kids figure out the trapdoor. And we haven't gone nearly far enough. I sighed. Check to see what's outside before you go all Rambo on me. What's a Rambo? Caden whispered as he peered out the door of our makeshift space. We were in some kind of shed that had been disguised to blend into the woods. On the dirt track between the cabin and ourselves, I could see Hugh's pickup truck and the sedan that Sammy had driven up here. I heard her take out her keys and shush Monster, who'd come panting up the tunnel behind us. Looks like the coast is clear. Hang on a sec. Sammy took my weight onto her shoulder. We moved toward the sedan as quietly as we could under the circumstances. Without our flashlights, all we could distinguish up ahead were twisted, black shapes. The woods were oddly quiet. No rustling of small animals or hum of insects. There was no movement from the cabin, either. We were about halfway up the dirt track to where the kids were parked when a red square lit up in the trees about 50 feet away. One of the Silent Kids' phones. All throughout the forest, other screens lit up in response. They'd spread out methodically to track us. In the eerie red light, the Silent Kids' eyes seemed to glow as well. For the first time, I realized that there was a sort of humming coming from their devices. Sammy clutched her head in pain. Go, go, go! Caden hissed behind us. We needed speed more than silence. Sammy unlocked her sedan with a remote key, practically flung me into the back, and slipped into the driver's seat. Caden came up behind with the rifle, and several sacks of the stuff from Hugh's shed. In the headlights, we could see them charging the car. Monster jumped in the back seat beside Hugh's gear, barking his head off. As Sammy started the car and swerved through the crowd of Silent Kids, Caden reached for Hugh's AR-15. I threw it out the window. What the fuck? Caden roared. This isn't some damn video game, I yelled back. Those are real kids out there, and they might be alright if we could just get them free of whatever this is. Oh yeah? Caden snarled. And what if we can't? What if this is spread to every town in the country by now? Or the world? There were tears in Caden's eyes. My own little brother is one of them. Silence. We bumped down the dirt road, chased by the running shadows in Sammy's taillights. Caden was still furious about the rifle, but I'd proved my own theory by throwing it away. None of the Silent Kids had tried to shoot us with it, or even acknowledged it. Whatever was controlling them could stalk and set traps on a massive scale, but it didn't really understand how our world worked. I was too tired and in too much pain to pay attention to my surroundings. I didn't even realize I was back in my own neighborhood until Sammy parked at the end of a subdivision that I recognized. It was a cul-de-sac with only 4 houses butting up against the woods, and although I'd walked past the winding path at its end on many an afternoon, I'd never known where it led. Until now. The hill beneath the power lines. The cave. Caden and Sammy were actually going to go through with their crazy plan. Their boneheaded idea wasn't the only thing making me nervous, though. Since we'd gotten back to town, we hadn't seen a single one of the Silent Kids. For almost a week now, I'd seen them on street corners and walking in packs at all hours of the day or night. Where had they all gone? In fact, we hadn't seen anyone. It was barely 6 a.m., but even so, we should have encountered a passing car, a jogger. But the neighborhood was as quiet as the forest had been. I rolled my window down and took a deep breath. The air was damp and chilly. Light was only just beginning to creep into the sky. Something had changed since we got into the cabin. I could feel it. A slamming car door snapped me out of my reverie. Caden was standing beside the trunk, reading the instructions on the blasting cap. "Stay here, boy." Sammy stuck her head in the window and petted Monster, who was whining. I couldn't tell if she was talking to me or the dog, but all it took was one look at my leg to know for sure that I wouldn't be going down any more forest trails. I moved it and winced. "I'm begging you," I grunted. "Do not do this. You're going to get yourselves killed." "Don't worry." Sammy tried to smile. "We'll be fine." I could see the fear in her eyes. She wasn't any more confident in this harebrained scheme than I was. She loaded the plastic bags of explosives into a sporty turquoise backpack she kept in her trunk. "Go on ahead," Caden muttered to her. He was still trying to understand the fine print on the blasting cap. "I'll catch up." Once Sammy was out of earshot, Caden leaned in the window and spoke to me. Rich, I've been thinking about what Sam said earlier. About how she saw the red lights on phones while she was being led through the woods. You don't think... No. She doesn't act anything like them. I think... Caden took a deep breath. I think it only affects kids somehow. Young people. Miss Black in music class told us one time that there are frequencies that only people under 24 can hear. And maybe it's like that. Let me get this straight. You're saying that whatever's controlling the Silent Kids only affects folks under 20 or so? Because you all are the only ones who can perceive it? I summed up. Caden nodded. That's why I need you to do me another favor, Rich. Caden looked at the gravy, misty world around us with a 1,000-yard stare that I'd only ever seen in my black and white war movies. If I come down that trail, and I'm not... me? Caden pointed a finger gun at the side of his head and made a firing motion. I don't want to kill anybody, Rich. I don't want to have to watch from inside my own body while my hands tear someone apart, like they did to Hugh. God, please, Rich, don't let me become one of them. Caden leaned on the car, bawling his eyes out. I opened the door, leaned on my cane, and forced myself to my feet despite the pain. I hugged the kid tight. I won't let you kill anyone, I promised. In my head, however, I was silently praying that I wouldn't have to make that choice. We'd only known each other for a single night, but Caden already felt like the grandchild I'd never had. I couldn't see myself pointing a .38 at his face and pulling the trigger. When the tears dried up, Caden straightened his back, squeezed my shoulder, and set off into the gray woods in pursuit of Sammy. It was only after he'd left and the fog began to clear that I noticed the hooded body laying face down in a nearby yard. In their gray sweatshirt and green cargo pants, they blended in perfectly with the misty morning grass. A phone lay beside its outstretched hand. And as I approached, it lit up with an eerie red glow. I hobbled over to the hooded teenager laying face down in the dewy grass. I moved as quietly as I could under the circumstances, because if the kid sprang to his feet and charged me, I was in no condition to run. As I got closer to the eerie red glow of the phone beside him, I understood what Sammy had meant. The air near the kid's phone seemed to hum with some kind of electricity, and I felt a kind of pressure in the back of my mind, like something was trying to push its way through. Puke rose in my throat. My knees felt weak. I put all my weight on my good leg, lifted my cane high above my shoulder, and hole-in-one that damn phone as far away as I could whack it. That sickening feeling vanished immediately. Nervously, I bent down beside the teenager, a brown-haired boy with glasses, probably only 14. His breathing was regular. He seemed to be asleep. But he was definitely one of the silent kids. I could tell by the scrapes and bruises on his hands and arms, the mud on his cargo pants. His skin was sallow and stretched from lack of sleep and nourishment, but that awful slack-jawed look had gone out of his face. Around the corner of the house, I saw a bare foot and a girl's black shoe. It was another silent kid, a girl of about 13 wearing a skirt and a jean jacket. She leaned against the fence like a puppet with its strings cut, like she'd fallen asleep trying to climb it. One of her hands was covered in blood, but I doubted it was hers. It was all very strange, but now that I knew these two, and maybe more, were near, I'd have to keep my guard up. Walking back to the car, I touched the cold steel of the revolver in my pocket, and wished I had the strength to follow Sammy and Caden. A horrible wind came roaring from the woods. Instinct made me duck, but my damn leg gave out and I wound up prone on the pavement beside Sammy's sedan. With no place to hide, I crawled into the oily darkness beneath it. The noise was so loud I couldn't even hear Monster's barks. Only after it passed over the car did I realize what it was. A jet-black helicopter, flying low. Two more followed it. Finally, the noise passed. I was just about to drag myself out from underneath the car when I heard Monster stand up and start scratching at the glass of the passenger side window, the one that faced the trail. Something was coming out of the forest. I kept still with my chest on the asphalt, listening to my heartbeat and gritting my teeth at the pain in my leg. The two figures in night camouflage Kevlar that came down the path looked military, but not from any outfit that I'd ever heard of. The pattern of their gear, the insignia, it was all wrong. To my horror, they approached the car. Soon, all I could see were their brutal-looking black boots. "Look at this," one grunted. "Owner probably went for a walk back when all this started and never came back. Probably got him before he knew what hit him. Poor bastard." A rifle butt shattered Sammy's car window. Broken glass rained down. The door opened, and Monster hopped out, tail wagging. I silently prayed that they wouldn't hurt him, and that he wouldn't do anything to alert these two weird paramilitary thugs to my presence. But I shouldn't have been worried. Monster was way too curious about the whole new world of smells on their gear to give a damn about me. "Who's a good boy?" A husky female voice chuckled, patting Monster. "Makes me glad that the higher-ups only ordered to neutralize civilians on this operation. I hate when we gotta kill every living thing just to keep some god-awful menace from spreading." "Yeah," the male agreed. "That scorched earth shit always leaves me feeling sick to my stomach. I just tell myself that if the civvies knew what we knew, they'd probably consider death a blessing. And that's considering that the higher-ups make us forget the really fucked up shit." He paused. "This was a bad one. They're sure they got it all." "Christ, Barker." I could hear the woman rolling her eyes. "How many times do I gotta explain it to you? Those things are four-dimensional beings. They exist both beneath the surface of our world and elsewhere. Fragging one here ain't any different from pulling up half a weed or cutting the tail off a lizard. Just grow back someplace else. Start doing the same shit. Taking over mines so it can feed. What are they going to tell the civilians? About the disappearances, you mean? Nothing. In this country, if it doesn't get reported on, might as well have never happened. And as for our operation, the higher-ups have all the civvies holed up in their houses. They told them there was a bad chemical spill and it wasn't safe to go outside. Pretty lame excuse if you ask me, but it did the job. Later they'll probably put some amnesics in the water supply. And as for the kids, well, that's a bright spot in all this mess. They won't remember anything. They'll wake up sore and with a weird feeling of missing time, but other than that... Christ, the man sighed. I have a teenage son. I'd hate to think. Well, like I said, that thing we fragged in the cave could worm its way back at any time. And anybody under 20 or so can have their brains scrambled by its frequencies. Here, boy. Throughout the whole blood-chilling conversation, the woman had been playing fetch with Monster. What do you think we ought to do with the pup? Well, we can't take him with us. The man shrugged as he turned to go. Look at this rich-ass neighborhood. Once the civvies get the go-ahead to come out of their houses and somebody sees this golden boy playing in their yard, he'll get adopted faster than you can say Nyarlathotep. You got a dog, Simmons? I did when I was a kid. Now that brings back memories. Should have stayed in my hometown and been a mechanic like my old man. Their boots crunched in the glass as they walked off, but their words kept ringing in my ears for a long time. Neutralize. What the hell did that mean? What were these weird troopers doing to the civvies like me? Or Sammy? Or Caden if they caught us outside? Would they inject us with some drug to make us forget? Haul us off to some unofficial prison with black bags over our heads? Or would they just shoot us on sight? It was an important question, because those two black-booted soldiers had come from the same path that Caden and Sammy had taken. I lay my cheek against the cool asphalt. It smelt like tar, dirt, and being alive. A week ago, I would have never imagined myself like this. Hungry, exhausted, barely able to walk. Face down beneath Sammy's car, only a few blocks away from my own house. There was no point in moving now, not with those two paramilitary goons on the loose. I reckoned I might as well get a little bit of shut-eye. Was that a sprinkler system? From where I lay beneath Sam's car, I could see a man in a bathrobe and pajamas sniffing the air nervously before walking to the end of his driveway to collect his newspaper. Leaning forward a little more, I caught a glimpse of a young couple pushing their toddler down the sidewalk in a stroller that probably cost more than my first car. The sky was light blue. The sun was in the east. I'd slept for over 24 hours. After limping over to take a leak behind the cover of the trees, I turned back to the bizarre sight of my neighborhood. Bizarre because it was completely normal. No young folks hunted in packs or lay face down on anyone's grass. People were starting up their cars, taking out their garbage, and mowing their lawns like none of what Caden, Sammy, and I had endured had ever happened. Howdy, neighbor. Trevor Bowden, a guy who was my own age, who talked my ear off every time I saw him on one of his walks, waved cheerfully at me. He was trimming his damn rose bushes. Hell of a scare yesterday, huh? I never expected something like that would happen in my neighborhood. Of course, ever since that new mayor took over, this town's gone straight to hell. He rambled on. My aching head only caught the key words. A dangerous chemical spill on the highway. A cloud of dangerous gas. Important to cover all doors and windows, especially for young people. Toxins that may cause muscle soreness and affect memory. It finally hit me. What I was hearing was the story they'd all been told to keep them inside, while those black-armored troops got down to business in the woods behind the neighborhood. Whoever was behind this not only had access to military-grade tech, but they'd also convinced the media to report completely false information. It was a lot to take in. Trevor, I finally cut in. This is sort of embarrassing, but I was out for a walk and I hurt my leg. Reckon you could give me a ride back to my place? It's only a few blocks down. 6 minutes later, I was waving goodbye to Trevor from my own front porch. He was still talking when he drove off. It felt like a lifetime since I'd been inside my own house. I called Sammy, then Austin again. No answer. I looked up Caden's parents' phone number, but on the 5th ring, I realized that anything I said would sound suspicious as well. I wondered what Monster was up to. With nothing better to do, I got a cold beer from the fridge, limped over to my recliner, put on another black and white war movie, and waited. Ding dong. Ding dong. Ding dong, ding dong, ding dong. It came late at night, just like before. I grabbed my revolver and hobbled to the door. Peering through my peephole, I wondered how many hooded figures I'd see on my stoop, how long it would be before they smashed in through the windows. When I saw who was on the porch, I opened the door so fast I damn near fell over. Monster came bounding in, shedding golden hair everywhere. And Sammy and Caden were behind him. "You're all right." Sammy hugged me. "What happened to you two?" "We were about halfway down the trail when we heard voices. 2 people talking into the radios," Caden explained. "They looked like, I don't know, like soldiers from the future. Me and Sammy got off the trail and hid in a ravine while they passed. They looked like bad news," Sammy added. "We were worried about you, all alone back there. And when we came out of the woods and saw the window broken and you gone, we didn't know what to think." "The area around the cave was sealed off," Caden went on. "There were guys in hazmat suits, searchlights, plastic tents. It was like a scene from a movie. We got out of there as fast as we could, and then when we came back, it was like none of it had happened at all," I finished for him. See, I reckon that at first, people didn't want to believe that the Silent Kids were real. Later, they were afraid to admit the truth. And now, they've forgotten all about it. Maybe it's easier for them that way. I looked from Sammy to Caden to Monster. Only a few days ago, we'd been strangers. But now, for the first time in a long time, I was standing side by side with friends. Whatever dangers might come to our town, from now on, I knew we'd face them together. Become a channel member today for early access, bonus videos, and special emojis only available to members. Check out the description below or click the join button for more info. If you'd like another way to help support the channel, please consider joining my Patreon page at patreon.com/JordanGroupHorror. As a patron, you'll get access to bonus videos and content. You'll be credited at the end of every video going forward, and if you decide to stay for 3 months, I'll name a character after you which will be featured in a Hollow's End story. Links to join the Patreon are in the description. Thanks everyone for listening. Please like, subscribe, and comment to help the channel continue to grow. And see you again next time at 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Hope you have a great night.